Hello everybody, it's your friendly digital technology librarian, Christy here. We've reached another Friday, so of course I have another Film Rec Friday ready for everybody out there. So, in the last couple weeks, we've been focusing on some really intense, dark, heavy horror films. But this week, I'm kind of switching things up a little bit. And instead of those super duper heavy, incredibly scary horror films, we are looking at three movies that are a bit more family friendly in their scariness level. These three films are very, very different from one another, but I do think have the appeal of being interesting to both younger audiences and adult audiences. At least in my opinion, I love each and every one of these films. I do think they are fantastically well made and maybe sort of head and shoulders above what a lot of other family friendly scary movies are. So I will give both my opinion, and then I also looked into Common Sense Media and their sort of official rating for age ranges. So hopefully that will give you a good idea of whether or not these three movies might be for your family as well. So anyway, as always, these films are available entirely for free with the use of your Milan-Berlin library card. So without any further ado, let's get to the Rex. Okay, my first pick of the day is available on both DVD and Blu-ray via our CleveNet service, and that is 2012's Paranorman. Paranorman is a fantastic, fantastic stop motion animated film, kind of blending a lot of horror aspects with comedy, especially some fantastic sort of slapsticky comedy in here. And it was produced by Studio Leica. Leica has put together Coraline, The Box Trolls, Kubo and the Two Strings, The Missing Link. I mean, it has a proven track record of phenomenally well-made films. And to be honest, Paranorman is really one of my favorites. There's just something I find so compelling about this storyline. So in Paranorman, we're dealing with a young man. His name is Norman Babcock, and he's voiced by Cody Smith-McPhee, who does a fantastic job, by the by. Norman has a gift. His gift is the ability to speak to the dead. Unlike some other characters who are able to speak to the dead in other films, I won't name names. Norman actually has a fairly decent relationship with the supernatural. He oftentimes prefers their company to the company of the real world because he does deal a great deal with some bullies and just some very real world issues, things that any tween would be dealing with, And he suddenly discovers that there's this 300-year-old curse on his town, and he has to use his ability to save this town because the curse is about to go essentially live. And all of a sudden, there are these zombies everywhere, and it's up to him to rescue people. This kid who, for some fairly obvious reasons, is pretty isolated. He's very much an introvert. He prefers the dead to the living. I mean, this is not a kid who has like hero type stamped on him, but that's kind of the whole point. And his journey, along with a lot of things that he discovers and about both himself and then about other people and the world, that's what makes this film, I think, so evocative. In that, while yes, it is absolutely billed as sort of a family film, it goes so much deeper into so many themes that you absolutely don't see that often. So yes, while definitely being billed as a family movie, there's just a whole lot to it that elevates it. So one, like I was mentioning, it is produced by Studio Leica. The production values in this are fantastic. So stop motion animation is always going to be an expensive thing, and because it's very time consuming. So, time is money. But there's something really special about stop motion animation, at least to me. I think it's an art form that gives an entirely different layer of feeling to characters that is completely different from that you get from, say, traditional cell animation. I love cell animation. I'm not bagging on it, but there's just something super special about stop motion. I just think that if a company is able to do it well, it elevates the whole movie. So in addition to the fact that it is a fantastic stop motion animation produced film, like everything about it, like the colors, the lighting, so very top notch. You have a really fantastically written story. So the writing of this, it does not dumb down anything. Yes, you are going to appeal to children, but 100% you will appeal to adults, um, in a way that if the Toy Story were darker, you might feel similarly. You know, there are certain jokes that will hit adults that will not hit kids, and there's certain jokes that will be more appealing to children, but neither seem to war with one another. It's just a really cohesive kind of humor and story in general. But then you also just you touch on some really interesting themes. You get, of course, bullying, uh, building courage, raising your own self confidence, themes that are pretty common in any coming of age story. You know, like that is not rare. But this one really delves into some very dark themes. Um, that you would not normally find in a children friendly film. It also builds on the pitfalls of mob mentality, the consequences of staying silent in the face of injustice. And we're not talking about like schoolroom injustice, we're talking about like serious big world injustices. And it doesn't dumb anything down. Like real world consequences of some of these acts, death. And this film does not shy away from that. Like death is clearly a part of this story, and it's not done necessarily in just a cute way, like the way that sometimes you'll sort of coat storylines that are supposed to be friendly to kids. No, like there's no coming back kind of situation. And I really appreciated that so much, because the consequences of such big themes have to be big as well, or else, the impact isn't there. Um, Common Sense Media gives this a 10 plus. I do think that's accurate. I think you absolutely could show it to younger children. I think that they just wouldn't get as much from it. I don't necessarily think that a younger child would hate it, or that it would be too much, because again, like I said, we're working on levels. But I definitely think 10 plus is a good suggestion. But yes, of course, always you know your child better than anybody, any expert would. So yeah, I just thematically find this one so compelling. I love the story, the art, everything about it. It is just a really fantastic example of a family friendly horror film. So again, please do check out Paranorman via DVD or Blu-ray via our CleveNet service. It is absolutely worth it and a total must watch. Okay, next recommendation is available to stream via our Canopy service, and that is 1990's The Witches. I've been a lifelong Roald Dahl fan. I love his books so much. So I'm generally pretty picky about filmed adaptations. There have been some fantastic Roald Dahl film adaptations and some really horrifically bad ones too. And I will say, I do think the 1990s adaptation of The Witches really captures the essence of Dahl's writing in a way that the newer version did not. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. In this 1990 adaptation, it's definitely a star vehicle for Angelica Houston. But beyond that, it's just really quite well done, and it very much keeps the same feeling that the book had, sort of that there's this weird off-kilter charm about Dahl, and I've always had difficulty expressing what exactly that is. And when he delves into this particular storyline with the witches, he goes beyond that sort of quirk and really does get kind of scary in a little bit, a bit like sort of macabre. I guess that might be a better way to describe it. There's like this unease about things and this sort of gallows humor that I think is especially effective within this particular storyline. So in The Witches, we are primarily staying at this really elaborate hotel in England with a young man named Luke and his grandmother Helga. Um, Luke has been orphaned, as many of Dahl's characters have been, which is really fascinating when you think about it, but I digress. And Helga isn't in the best of health, so Luke really sometimes tries to take on a great deal himself. But he's also a child, so he's curious and he's interested. And his whole life, he's heard sort of little tidbits about witches and, how they do things and what their approach to the world is. So when he hears that there might be a convention of witches at this same hotel, like you do, he decides that he wants to know more and he goes to spy on them. But things definitely take a turn. They discover that Luke is spying on them and they turn him into a mouse. And there's a whole lot going on. Him being turned into a mouse is no mere side project. The witches, who are primarily incredibly evil, intend to turn all children into mice and intend to turn those mice into confections and confectionery shops around the world. One, horrifying if you think about it, and also just really weird. Again, Roald Dahl is very weird, and I love that about him. Like, even when you think about, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, some of the stuff in there is pretty strange and pretty terrifying. So this is not new. It's just it works really well. What that tone works incredibly well with a theme like witches. It doesn't feel like it's coming out of left field. And Angelica Houston as the Grand High Witch, it's such a masterful performance. There's a little bit of camp in there, of course, because I do think that camp is a really interesting element within a lot of Roald Dahl's stories too. But she just plays it so well, and her performance is very much aided by a lot of effects and puppetry done by the Jim Henson Company. And The Witches happens to be one of Jim Henson's, well, actually, I do believe it's Jim Henson himself's last project before his death, the one that he'd worked on closest to that particular period. And the whole company just does some incredible work, both with puppetry, but then animatronics with the mice as well. So, there's just this magic to it that I think that the Henson Company brings whenever it's working on a project that you don't see in other films or other adaptations of the same work. Anyway, that dark fantasy element blends with a lot of comedy along with some fairly kid-friendly horror, and it's just a good movie. It's a really great adaptation and a really entertaining film. You've got a couple of other familiar faces in the cast. Rowan Atkinson plays a character in here, but honestly, that marquee role goes to Houston, and she just runs with it. There's this. Well, is it a spoiler? There's a moment in it. Hold on one second. Sorry. Sorry about that. There's a moment at the end that, even now rewatching it, because it's been years since I'd seen this, it's probably been at least a couple decades. There is this moment that the second I saw it, I remembered how I felt as a kid, and I remember thinking, this is not okay. And it all came back because the same feeling 20 years later was still there. So if you are a fan of really cool production values, because like I said, you've got the Henson working the puppetry angle, but also animatronics. If you are interested in those slightly off-kilter stories, especially those by Roald Dahl, if you are interested in bravura performances, again, Angelica Houston in this, so good. Please check out the 1990 version of The Witches. The more recent adaptation just was not anywhere near as good. It wasn't as close. I feel like the the tone was not there. You did get an excellent performance from Anne Hathaway as the Grand High Witch, not taking away from her performance. It was probably my favorite thing about that adaptation, but it does not, I don't think, hold up to Houston's portrayal in the 90 edition. So again, The Witch is available to stream on Canopy. Total must watch. Okay, final film of the week. This one is available on DVD via our CleveNet service, and that is 1988's Beetlejuice. Don't say it 3 times. So Beetlejuice is this fantastic, fantastic fantasy horror comedy film directed by Tim Burton in Tim Burton's heyday. Honestly, I think this might be my favorite Burton film. Batman Returns or this. I don't know. They're so close, so close. Both of them star Michael Keaton, who is fantastic in this. But it also stars like a really, really fantastic cast. In Beetlejuice, we are dealing with Barbara and Adam Maitland. Barbara is played by Gina Davis, and Adam is played by Alec Baldwin. This lovely young couple just starting out, and unfortunately they die in a freak car accident. It's presented in sort of like a weird, silly way, but it is in its own sense like very much a tragedy, especially as we get to know these characters and what could have been. Anyway, they don't move on, and they find themselves in a situation where they have to haunt their own home. They need to haunt their own home, not only just to keep it for themselves, but because they absolutely detest the family that moves in, or at least they detest the parents of the family that moves in. The Dietzes, they are sort of your stereotypical 1980s yuppie couple, like very very into sort of showing off that sort of like urban wealth. They love leaning into their own eccentricities, and then the two are played by Catherine O'Hara and Jeffrey Jones. They're both always so good in the roles that they play, but Catherine O'Hara in here is just absolutely glorious. There are a couple of scenes that I don't want to spoil, but she's just amazing. And then the Dietzes also have a teen daughter played by the incomparable Winona Ryder. And Lydia, the daughter, is sort of like your proto emo teen. You know, she's very much goth. She loves dark things and the supernatural. And she has some fantastic like quotes that will stay with you for long after this film is over. The Maitlands, they try really, really hard to get the Dietzes out, but they discover that the Dietzes are actually really fascinated by the fact that their house might be haunted. Also, there's a huge amount of time where the Dietzes have no idea that they are being haunted, or at least Catherine O'Hara and Jeffrey Jones's characters don't. The Maitlands get so desperate to get this family out of their home that they end up hiring Beetlejuice, a guy who sort of markets himself as a bioexorcist, a haunting expert, if you will, but they don't realize that his methodology is far darker than they had any intentions of going, and it becomes very apparent very quickly how dangerous Beetlejuice can be, both to the Dietzes and then the Maitlands themselves. In particular, his attention is caught on Lydia, and that's super creepy for a lot of reasons. But it somehow really, really works to tie the whole story together. Beetlejuice is played with madcap sort of glee by Michael Keaton. This really might be one of my favorite Michael Keaton roles, and I'm a huge Michael Keaton fan. I loved him in the Batman movies, Birdman. He's incredible, but there's just something about Beetlejuice, and he just runs with this role. This guy is crass, he's ridiculous, he's violent, he's just a whole lot, and Keaton just does so well with it. There are scenes in this movie that I think about to this day. I do try and watch it every couple of years just because I love it that much. I became a very young Harry Belafonte fan because of this. And like, you will be humming certain songs for days, maybe even years. And it's just so great. Like everything about this one, from the look of the film to the vibe, the tone, everything. This is what I wish every Tim Burton film was. Like really truly, he just knew exactly what he wanted and was able to execute it, chef's kiss, in such a perfect way. um Other things that were really cool about this one, it apparently only relative cost 15 million, but then it grossed 74 million, which is crazy. It won Academy Awards for best makeup. It won a number of Saturn Awards. It was just one of those films that worked. There have been other adaptations. They did like an animated TV series that I remember watching as a kid. Slightly different tone, but really quite entertaining. There were video games. There was a stage musical made in the late 2000 teens. I want to say 17, 18. The music is really great in that too. And now everyone who's a fan of this movie is so excited about it. So in 2023, earlier 2023, they announced that they're doing a sequel, a long awaited sequel. And at first I was like, yeah, sure, whatever, heard that before. And now there's like, it's actually filming. We actually have set photos, proof positive that this is a real thing, and I'm so excited for it. And it's supposed to come out, I believe, in September of 2024. So fingers crossed. I don't know if that's gonna happen. The date is gonna happen, but there is a sequel, and I'm just thrilled. Anyway, Common Sense Media gives this one a rating of 13 plus. I definitely agree. It does get thematically, the way it presents certain themes, definitely for older kids. But I watched it when I was probably, I'm sure I watched it when it first came out, and I would have been 5 or so in 1988. So yeah, age range, mileage may vary, but I definitely say 13 plus is a very safe age. So yeah, if you're looking for something that is funny, scary, ridiculous, visually stunning, well acted, like I said, Michael Keaton, excellent, then definitely check out Beetlejuice, available on DVD via CleveNet service. Total must watch. All right, so those were my picks for our children-friendly horror films. If you have any recommendations for movies that would fit that bill, please comment with those below. If you have any recommendations for themes you'd like to see us cover in the future, definitely recommend those. As always, thank you so much for joining me. If you've made it all this way, you are absolutely awesome. I enjoy putting these lists together, and October, as I've mentioned many times, is my absolute favorite month to do this. So yeah, it's really great when I know that any of these recommendations are helpful at all. Once more, thank you for joining me, and hopefully I will see you next week. Bye bye.